Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm a 27-year-old female. I've been on this subreddit for a while now, and I decided to share my own story. This happened 5 years ago. I had recently moved into my new apartment, which was farther from my job. But given my lack of driver's license and how dodgy the public transportation is in Detroit, I decided to just get a bike since it wouldn't be too far. So I opened my laptop and I started browsing Craigslist for a used bike to see if I could get any good deals. After finding a few that I was interested in, I decided to give the owners a call. The first one had recently sold his bike and had yet to take down the ad, but the second bike that I was interested in, it was available. I asked about the condition it was in, and the seller offered to let me see it in person before I make any sort of deal. I agreed, and I told him that I would be there tomorrow at around 4 to look at the bike and then make my decision. So the next day at 4, I arrived at his residence. It was a small flat with a silver car parked in the driveway. I walked up to the door and I rang the doorbell. After a few seconds, a man opened the door. He was a tall, thin man with shoulder-length brown hair. He was wearing a white shirt with a stain on it, as well as a pair of jeans. "Hi, I'm here to see the bike. Are you Carl by any chance?" I said. The man smiled and said yes, before exiting his house and then closing the door behind him. As he led me to his garage, he kept looking back at me. He said, "You know, you're pretty cute, Lisa." I didn't really know how to respond to that, so I just tried to change the subject by asking about the bike. He opened the garage to reveal a cluttered space, and from it, he pulled out the bike and rolled it into the yard. "For your viewing pleasure, beautiful." Of course, I was weirded out, but the bike looked really good for the price he was asking, so I just grit my teeth and bared it as I checked the state of the cycle. After inspecting the bike, it seemed to be in a good condition. With my mind made up, I turned to him and asked if he was still okay with the price he posted. But as I turned, I noticed him really close to my face, so I flinched and I backed up a little, but he didn't even react. He stared me dead in the eyes and said, "Well, how about this? You go on a date with me and I'll give it to you for free." I was starting to get a really bad vibe from him, so I fished out the $50 from my purse and I handed it to him, hoping that he would get the message. But he barely acknowledged it, and then he just said, "Does this Saturday sound good to you? I'll pick you up." Well, he clearly wasn't taking the hint, so I took another step back from him and I said in a firm voice, "No, thank you, I'm not interested." And I handed him the money. He stared at me for a moment, and in that silence I felt scared. We were alone in his yard, and he was standing between me and the road, and he was much bigger than me. Thankfully, he let out a sigh and then took the money. When that said and done, I took the bike and I walked it out of his property as fast as I could before getting on and cycling away. And as I did, I vaguely heard him saying, "See you later, Lisa," as I sped off, but I didn't care. All I really cared about was putting as much distance as I could between me and him. Once I had made it to my block, I felt the comforting sense of home. Feeling protected, I pulled in, but that was just wishful thinking. as I parked it at the bike rack for my apartment and I walked up to my room. I realized that my phone had been going off the whole time. And given that I was writing and in a less than ideal mindset, I probably just didn't notice it until now. When I checked my phone, I saw 9 text messages from Carl Euler. My heart dropped. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as I checked what he texted me, and I realized now my mistake. But at that time, I wasn't thinking about anything other than what kind of weirdo I just bought a bike from. As I opened them, a little check mark appeared below his messages. My eyes grew wide as I came to the realization that he now knew that I looked at them. He sent another text, a simple, "See you Saturday." And I immediately scrolled up to see what he wrote. "Hey, it's Carl, so are we still on for this weekend? I know you're just trying to start things out on the wrong foot and not take advantage of me. You're so thoughtful, but I didn't mind. I know you're a good girl who's gonna treat me right. I'll be sure to treat you for the $50 though. Are you still on your way home? Lisa?" And then the last text after we saw that I checked them. "See you Saturday." I blocked the number and I hoped that that would be the end of it. I spent the next few days trying to forget about it, but his last message, "See you Saturday," was stuck in the back of my mind. That morning, I looked out my door suspiciously. He doesn't know where I live, but the paranoia seemed to be getting the better of me. Seeing nothing, I chastised myself for being so childish, and I went on my way to the store. It was only on my way back that I realized that my fear was right. Right there, on the front of my apartment building was Carl. He was just standing there on his phone. That was until he saw me. A wide smile spread across his face as he looked at me. "Hey, Lisa, I'm here for our date. Did you get my text?" he said as he walked towards me. I unconsciously backed away, shaking my head no and holding my grocery bags tightly. I could feel myself shaking as he approached me, but just as he approached me, I heard another voice from behind me. "Hey, is there a problem here?" I turned my head slightly to the left to see my neighbor Daniel walk up beside me. He looked at me with concern before looking back to Carl. "No problem, just here for my date," he said, looking expectantly at me. No longer alone, I slightly feel safer and I said aloud, "No, I don't want to go on a date with you. Please, leave me alone." I tried standing a bit taller to sound more stern, but Carl wasn't having that. "Come on, Lisa, don't be like that," he said, trying to get closer. But as he took a step, Daniel moved in front of me, looking him dead in the face. "Well, you heard her, buddy. She's not interested." Daniel was a pretty big guy with a good build, so he was towering over Carl as they locked eyes. And after a few agonizing seconds, Carl nodded before leaving. Me and Daniel both let out a sigh of relief as he turned the corner on the block before he turned and asked if I was okay. I never saw Carl again, and I hope that I never will. Back when I got my first apartment, I was working at a retail store and I didn't make a lot of money, so I tried to get a lot of cheap used stuff to furnish my place, which meant a lot of thrift store shopping and Craigslist scrolling. I found several great buys on there too. I got a practically new couch and chair I got a kitchen set with pots and skillets and even some window blinds. I had an older TV that my dad let me take from their place since they didn't really use it. However, it had a pretty bad screen burn. It went from rarely being used to being used daily, and it was an older tube TV, so it was bound to happen. So, I started browsing Craigslist again to see if I could find a cheap flat screen. Even if it was older or not in the best condition, I thought that it was better than nothing. So after passing up several ads that were asking for too much or it was too far away, I finally found one that was within my range. The title said that it was a 32-inch LG TV and all they wanted for it was $50. They included a few pictures of it as well, and it appeared that there was nothing wrong with it. So I was trying to figure out what the catch was. I messaged them inquiring about it, and their reason made sense. They said that they were moving out of state, so they were more just trying to get rid of a bunch of stuff so they didn't have to take it with them. I thought that this was a total win for me, and I started making plans to pick it up. I was planning to get it the next day because I still needed to get the cash, but they were adamant that I pick it up that day because they were going to be busy. No problem. I just had to run over to the bank and then drive out there, hopefully beating the rush hour. I went and I pulled out cash from an ATM to make it faster, but that meant that I would be giving them the $60 instead of the $50 since it couldn't do an odd amount. That was fine though, since I was still getting this TV for a steal. I then set up my GPS to the address given, and I made my way there. The place was about 40 minutes away in a city that I had rarely been to, so I was going to be heavily relying on my GPS. When it said that I had arrived, I had to go around by the block as I had apparently driven right by it. And by the third time, I finally slowed down and paid attention to the numbers on the surrounding houses to make sure that I didn't miss it again. Then I realized that I was at the correct place, but it was just easy to miss. Because it was an abandoned house. There was a nice light blue house next to it, and then a smaller rundown home. One of the windows was boarded up and the front door looked like it was either missing or off on the hinge because I couldn't see one. There was a driveway, but there were no cars in it, nor parked on the side of the road. It may sound stupid, but I was trying to be reasonable in thinking that they did say that they were moving. Maybe they were clearing out or renovating this place, and they were getting rid of stuff left behind here. Or maybe the place was condemned, but squatters were living there. And maybe authorities caught them and told them that they had to leave. I was trying to convince myself any way that I could that this was reasonable, until I saw someone walk over and stand in the doorway. It was a disheveled-looking woman. She had on some old beat-up-looking hoodie with her hair in a bun. She then turned to look back in the house, then looked back and pointed to my car. That's when I saw a guy approach the door. This guy looked a little more intimidating. He was easily twice my size, also in a hoodie, but had it pulled up so I could barely make out a face. The guy started walking down the steps this whole time while he was looking in my direction. Finally, my gut told me that I needed to get the hell out of there, so I just burnt out. This didn't stop the guy from running towards my car as I drove away. I kept looking in my rearview mirror the whole way home to ensure that I wasn't being followed by that guy. And when I got back, I went to my computer and I looked at the listing a little further. I zoomed in on the pictures, and the first thing that caught my attention was that it said that the brand for the TV was an LG, yet the logo I saw had a V on it. So this was not even an LG. Then I noticed the window to the left of the TV. It was looking out to a street with a house across from it, and the porch railing had snow on it. This occurred in May, so there was no snow in sight and there were no houses across from the one that I went to. It was an apartment complex and a few small shops. The house also didn't have a porch, let alone a railing. I obviously had some tunnel vision occurring, and I didn't really inspect or notice anything in the pictures beyond the TV that I wanted. I don't know if this was a picture they took elsewhere or just one that they took from the internet, or hell, maybe even another listing on Craigslist. I was disappointed that I didn't get the TV, but even more disappointed in myself for almost falling for what obviously looked like a setup. I reported that listing and then moved on. I did end up finding a TV at a local thrift store a week or two later, and I pushed past the incident until I heard a story on the news. They were talking about safety and precautions that we should take when meeting up with strangers, like from Craigslist and for sale offers in newspaper listings. Then they mentioned how there was another couple that was attacked after responding to an ad on Craigslist. They were meeting up to get something when they were robbed at gunpoint and one of them stole their car. Their car had their small child in it still. And this event took place in the same city that I went to for the TV. I was terrified and I thought that it could have easily been the same people that I saw. And if I was stupid enough to get out of the car, it could have been me. I know they weren't too smart taking their own child with them, let alone leaving them in the car, but they were all unharmed as they abandoned the car too. Probably because it came with a small child. And don't worry, this definitely steered me away from this kind of stuff. I still occasionally will get things listed on Nextdoor because at least I know the area, and typically only when I have one of my friends with me to help, just in case. I have a fairly short and really weird story about one time when I used Craigslist to find a rental. At that time, I was living with my aunt and uncle, and I was working to find a new place. They weren't really pushy about me getting out of their home, but they were definitely wanting their space back. I appreciated them letting me stay, and I could take a hint, so I decided that I would go and try and find a new place. Enter Craigslist, the world of weird people selling things at a low price. I decided that I would hop onto the internet's version of Kmart and see what was available nearby. On the plus side, I didn't have much to move. I could get it all out and in within a few hours. It was really just a bed, a dresser, and a fish tank. Everything else could fit in a duffel bag. Obviously, with only that going for me, I was looking for a small place to stay, like preferably a studio or something. And after searching and talking to a bunch of weirdos and blocking a few numbers, I found what looked to be a dream come true. A fully furnished, ready-to-move studio apartment that was in a decent part of town. I contacted the owner, and after a quick chat on the phone, we had set up a time for me to move in that following Monday, so long as I could wire him the deposit money by the Friday before. At that time, it was Wednesday, so I had 2 days to get him the money. Thankfully, I had this planned for a little while now, so I did have some cash set aside to get this done. And he only wanted $500 for the deposit, which was going to be a bit more than half the rent per month. After discussing it with him, and sending him the money via whichever money transfer app we used. He had mentioned that the deposit would cover the first month and that on the first month, I would owe my normal $750. It was the middle of the month, so this was good with me. I was perfectly fine with this arrangement, and Monday came around and I showed up with my truck filled with my few items and my clothes. When I got there, he was standing outside the studio and we chatted about the location as he gave me a quick tour. It was a nice little place, perfect for me, and it had everything that I could have wanted. I actually asked him about the furnishings, on why he was renting it out with everything in it. And by everything, I mean everything. There was a TV with a console connected to it, a stereo on the side of the room, and a bookshelf loaded with popular books. He mentioned that he used to rent it as an Airbnb, which is why it was furnished, and that he was just tired of dealing with people like that, so he just wanted to rent it out to an actual long-term tenant. It sounded good to me at that time, so I just thanked him, told him that I would have the rent to him on the 1st. I signed the contract that he had typed up, and that was that. Well, that wasn't actually that. In fact, it was not that at all. I lived there for a total of 3 days, from Monday to Wednesday. And on Wednesday night, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard someone talking out in the hallway of the apartment. I figured that it was just the neighbors, until I heard a key hit the lock and the door opened. I cannot express the awkward moments that followed. The couple that walked into the apartment looked at me like I was a robber, and I was looking at them like they were breaking into my apartment. And I think we all just kind of wanted to scream in terror. They asked who I was. I told them that I was the tenant. I asked who they were, and they said they were the tenants. Well, long story short, and after a lot of loud talking and confusion, we figured out what had happened. They were the real tenants, and they'd been out of town for the last week. I was not actually the tenant and was basically sold an occupied unit by someone that didn't have the rights to do so. I showed them my lease, they showed me theirs, much more official looking lease, and I showed them the messages and the email and the proof that I paid someone, and, well, they live there, so they didn't really have to show me anything. What was worse is that they didn't know the guy that I had paid, as the app that I paid with said that his name was something like Mario, and they really had no idea who he was. We ended up getting the police involved so that we could make a report for the whole situation because it was so messed up. In the end, I apologized for eating their food and using their furniture, and we agreed that I could leave my stuff there for a couple of days so I could move back into my aunt and uncle's house. Mostly just my fish tank and dresser, as they were heavy and hard to move. Thankfully, they were fairly polite with me considering I was basically an intruder in their home. And thankfully, they believed me and didn't just resort to violence or anything like that. Unfortunately, I was never able to get a hold of the landlord, or supposed landlord, to give him a piece of my mind, and I was out of $500. I did keep in touch with a couple that actually lived there, and they never figured out how the guy got the key to their apartment, and they had the actual owner change the locks immediately. So, yeah, that's my weird story about the time that I rented a unit that wasn't for rent. I ended up finding a place that was legit on Craigslist, and I moved in. And thankfully, there were no more late night surprises. I know the story wasn't terribly creepy per se, but it's still scary to think that this guy had the wherewithal to coordinate this while the couple was out of town, and that he had the key to their place without their knowledge. In the end, It's just one of those weird, creepy life lessons. A while back, when I hit 19, I kind of ended up in a situation where I wanted to get out of the house and get my own place. Mostly because I was tired of living with my parents. It was more that I was tired of living by others' rules. I love my parents dearly. I really do, but they were also pretty strict with things, and it was definitely holding back my social life. I'm kind of a free spirit and I like to be out socializing, but they wanted me home by 8 p.m. every night. That's not me complaining, their house, their rules and all. But it was enough to make me realize that I could just move out and get a cheap place nearby, keep them close, and make sure that I had my freedom. So that's what I decided that I was going to do. After looking around for a while, I actually found a decent apartment that I could afford with my job that was less than 10 minutes away from where my parents lived. I went through all the motions to get the apartment. I paid the deposit and I got it. Moving day came and my parents helped me get everything in and set up. And it was at that point that I realized that I didn't have a whole lot and definitely didn't have enough to fill an apartment. My bedroom had my bed, my desk, dresser, and my living room had a table with a TV on it, and that was pretty much it. I started talking to my dad about it and trying to figure out a list of things that I needed for the apartment or what I could use, and my dad made a suggestion that I should look for cheap furniture on Craigslist. We talked about it for a bit, and he actually mentioned that if I found some stuff for the apartment on Craigslist that would work for me and wasn't terribly expensive, he would go half and half with it and go with me to get it all. I thought that this was a good idea. He had a truck, plus having him with me would make me feel a whole lot safer in dealing with strangers. I agreed, and I told him that I would look online and get a hold of a few people over the next couple of weeks, and then we would meet up when I had everything ready to go. I did just that. I got on Craigslist and I went through a number of postings and sent a few emails. Some responses I got were obviously scams or bots, so I ignored those. But I had a few people that were interested in selling to me at first, but ended up disregarding me after I told them that it was going to be almost 2 weeks before I could pick it up. Apparently, they weren't willing to wait to sell it, which is fine. After sifting and sending, I was actually able to get a few people that were willing to hold on to their items for me, so at least it wasn't all a waste of time. But then, I found a post that was more or less furniture, men's clothing, electronics, and more. I want it all gone for $200. I clicked through the pictures that this person had posted, and looking through it, they were selling a lot of things for such a low price. There were a number of furniture items, a couple of game consoles, and a decent desktop computer. And then clicking through it, I noticed that the clothes were mostly my size. I was over the moon, thinking that I had hit a jackpot. Sure, it seemed a bit sketchy, but at the same time, if this was legit, I would have furnished my whole place and had a bunch of what was basically luxury items for only $200. The post had a phone number on it, so I immediately grabbed my cell and I called the person. I mentioned the post and I asked the woman that had answered why she was selling things for so cheap, because it just did seem a bit odd. She then said that she and her boyfriend had split up and that she hadn't seen him for a few weeks at this point, and all the items she wanted gone were his. She even sent me a few pictures of herself in front of all the items while we were talking to prove that it was all real. I told her that I would give her the asking price for it if she could hold it for 2 days, as it was the Thursday before we were supposed to get the items, and that I would take every single item off of her hands that she wanted to sell. She actually agreed, and she mentioned that I was the first person to call and said that she would go ahead and mark it sold. I was obviously over the moon. I had just struck Craigslist gold. I called my dad and I told him about this lady that had a bunch of items that she wanted to get rid of for only $200. He seemed a bit concerned at first, which was understandable, but I explained the situation and mentioned that she had sent me proof that it was real, and then I told him that it was left over from a bad breakup and that the boyfriend hadn't come back for it. It took a bit of extra convincing, but I was able to finally get him to go with it. Saturday morning comes and I text the woman mentioning that we would be there within the hour. She responded with an okay, and that was it. Not really the best response, but it was enough for me. We headed to the house, and I was feeling even better about this transaction. The house was nice. It was like multi-story and well taken care of, so she could afford to just get rid of these things for way under retail value, kind of nice. We pull into the driveway and I walk up to the door and I ring the doorbell. Nothing. No response. We waited for a little while, but after a couple of minutes with no response, I rang the doorbell again, and still no answer. I pulled up the initial messages between the two of us to make absolutely sure that this was the address, and it definitely was. I then decided to go ahead and give her a call. And when I did, I could hear the phone ringing inside the house, like just on the other side of the door. I actually glanced over toward the window by the door and started looking inside. My dad chastised me at first, saying that I was being rude. But I had this really weird feeling that something was off. This was a nice house. The woman I spoke with was friendly and seemed like she really was wanting to get rid of these items. And I was really wanting to get the stuff she was selling. But then, I realized why I was feeling off about the whole thing and what I was actually seeing. There was someone lying on the floor just inside the door. I mentioned it to my dad, saying that I think something had happened to the lady. He came over and looked in, and then he told me to call 911, and I could tell by his tone that he realized that something was definitely wrong. I called them and I explained the situation to the person on the other end. It was a bit weird having to tell them that we had no idea who this person was, just that we were here to buy stuff, and then tell her that there was a person unconscious on the floor inside the house. It was just as awkward trying to explain it to the first cop that pulled up to the house as well. But I think they understood it better than the dispatcher. And sure enough, the officer agreed that there was a person unconscious in the house and decided that that was cause to kick the door in and then call the medics. They obviously kept us out in the driveway, and we had to answer a lot of questions about why we were here and how we were connected to what was now a crime scene. After the medics show up, the potential crime scene became a confirmed crime scene. And it became pretty clear how serious this really was. The long short of it is, the woman was deceased, and based on how the officer explained it, it was an obvious homicide. Thankfully, I had all the text messages and screenshots of the post to help show that we weren't the ones who killed her. But I also was able to explain to them that she had told me about her ex and how they split up. They ended up taking my information and telling me that they would be in touch with me if they had any more questions. And then we had to leave at that point. They never called me back or asked me to come in at all. I don't know if they ever ended up solving the case, but it definitely seems like this was a situation where the ex-boyfriend came back and then did the unthinkable. What makes it worse, part of me still thinks that he may have done it because she was selling his stuff, and that if I hadn't set up the meeting to pick it all up, he may not have done it at all. But if it weren't for me, then someone else would have jumped on the deal, right? I don't let it tear me up, but it does bother me a little. I did end up getting a couch for my living room from another seller and a few other things, but that was the only time that I ever used Craigslist. I know it's not a common thing to happen, but I didn't want to ever be put in a situation like that again. A long time ago, I was a single mother with a young boy about 7 years old, and I was doing my best to make ends meet with what little money that I could scrape together working part-time. We didn't live in the best home, but I did everything that I could to keep him happy, healthy, and fed. And I like to believe that I did a damn good job of it. I can say that nowadays, things are much better. He's grown, and I'm in a new marriage. And honestly, life is much happier. And that said, there were times where I made mistakes and where things got really rough. This is actually about an event where the unthinkable could have happened, and I really shouldn't have brought him with me, but I'm actually glad that I had. Though, I will say that my decisions weren't the worst part. I thought things were okay. I just trusted someone a bit more than I should have. So this was back when my son and I had just moved into a new apartment when he was about 7 or 8 at the most. My husband and I had been divorced for a year, and I was just really getting out into the world after losing the house. Well, there is a long story there, but I won't get into it. I was working part-time, so I didn't have a lot of money. But I had a family member that was helping me with the rent for the time being, so it wasn't a huge deal. However, after having lived with them for a year, and then moving into my own apartment, I realized how much I was actually missing to be self-sufficient. One of the big things that I was missing was a vacuum. Vacuums are the one thing that you never even think about, and when you realize you don't have one, and then go look for a good one, you come to the conclusion that they are rather expensive. So, in a moment of genius, I went out to Craigslist to see if I could find a cheap secondhand vacuum that was at least decent quality. In my mind, if I could find one that I could use and keep for a year at most, I would most likely be able to get the money together to get a good one that was new. And as such, I went for a mid-low price tier when searching, and I ended up finding one that I liked, and the person only wanted $20 for the vacuum. I contacted him, everything seemed reasonable, and honestly, I didn't even get any red flags when myself and this person sent messages back and forth about the whole transaction. Everything about this transaction seems like it was going to be ideal. Like I would bring $20 and then he would give me a vacuum, and then that would be it. Of course, one of the dumb decisions that I did make was being willing to meet this guy at his house instead of a public place. I will admit that I was a bit naive back then, and I hadn't done many transactions online. I thought that it would just be a 5-minute thing. So on that following Sunday, I started heading toward the address that he gave me, and I sent a message saying that I was on my way. I pulled up to the house, and there was a man standing outside on the front porch holding a glass of iced tea, just kind of watching me as I pulled up. I got out of the car, and my son followed pretty closely behind me. I thought about telling him to stay in the car, but I kind of thought that that would be a worse idea in a strange place. As I approached, the man on the porch asked if I was my name, and I said that I was. He turned and then opened the door, and then mentioned that I could step in the entryway and that he would go get the vacuum for me. We stepped just inside the door, and then the man went over toward the other end of the house and into a bedroom. As he was out of my sight, he kind of started making small talk about the vacuum, saying that it was still good, that he had just changed the belt on it, and he apologized that he had lost one of the attachments for it. After this, he, out of seemingly nowhere, asked if I was a Christian. I mentioned that I was, and because I was taken aback, I asked why that was relevant. He then followed it up with I was just asking, oh, I'm sorry if I pulled you away from church to do this sale. He came out of the room with a vacuum, and he then continued saying, I'm pretty devoted to my faith myself, so I know how important it is to go to church. Do you go to church? It was a bit weird, but I thought that maybe this man was just really religious. So I mentioned that we hadn't lately because we had just moved, and I hadn't found one in the area to attend. He smiled and nodded, like he understood. But then it got weirder, he said, and this is a direct quote because I will never forget his words. He said, You know, God told me that you would be coming alone, and that if you did, I should take you as mine and then run away into the desert. I just sort of stared at him like, what the hell is wrong with you? He then laughed and then said, But you didn't come alone. You came with your son. I think he was testing me, and this was his way of making sure that I'm faithful. I was ready to run out of that house, but I was also afraid that if I did, he would do something. After what probably was 2 or 3 minutes of panic-filled silence, he just kind of pushes the vacuum towards me and says, Oh, here, you can have it. I don't need the money. I grabbed it and just sort of turned away to leave. The entire time that we were walking toward my car, this man was seriously saying some prayer, one that I didn't know, so I don't think if it was a real one. I pulled away and I drove out of that neighborhood faster than I should have. Thankfully, my son just kind of thought that he was weird, and it didn't really click that we were in the presence of an absolute psychopath. I just kind of laughed and I said to him, Yeah, he was a bit weird, huh? And then thanked my lucky star that he decided that my son was a reason to not hurt me. That was one of the only times that I ever did any deals off of Craigslist, and was the only time that I ever did one at someone's house. After that, it was always store parking lots or other public places. I will also mention that I blocked his number after that, as he did try to text me one more time asking if I wanted to go to his church. I responded with no thanks, and then I blocked him. Thankfully, the vacuum did work, so I guess that's a plus. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared because your fear feeds me.